people say they want to lose weight, what they are often expressing is not a scientific goal, but an emotional one. They want relief from discomfort, from breathlessness, from tight clothes, from the quiet judgment they feel when they look in the mirror or imagine how others see them. Weight becomes a symbol, a number that seems to promise freedom if it goes down. But the human body does not speak in symbols. It speaks in biology, chemistry, energy, adaptation. And in that language, weight loss and fat loss are not the same conversation at all, even though we use the words as if they are interchangeable. The scale is one of the most trusted objects in modern health culture, yet it is also one of the least understood. When a person steps onto it, the number that appears feels authoritative, almost moral, as if it is passing judgment on effort, discipline, or worth. But that number is not a verdict. It is merely a measurement of gravitational pull on everything the body contains at that moment. It does not know why the weight is there, how it got there, or what purpose it serves. It only knows how heavy the sum is, and that simplicity is both its power and its greatest limitation. Body weight is not a single substance. It is a composite of many living tissues and fluids that are constantly changing in response to food, movement, hormones, stress, sleep, and time of day. Muscles swell and shrink depending on use and recovery. Bones slowly adapt to load over months and years. Blood volume shifts. The digestive tract fills and empties. Cells store and release water. Fat cells expand and contract. The scale compresses all of this complexity into one number, stripping away context and meaning. Water alone can dramatically alter body weight without changing health in any meaningful way. A salty meal, a stressful night, a long flight, or hormonal fluctuations can cause the body to retain fluid. The scale rises, and panic often follows. On another day, reduced carbohydrate intake or increased sweating may lower water retention, and the scale falls, bringing relief and satisfaction. Yet in both cases, body fat may be unchanged. The emotional response is real, but the biological change is largely temporary. Glycogen, the stored form of carbohydrate, illustrates this confusion clearly. For every unit of glycogen stored, several units of water are held alongside it. When food intake drops, glycogen is used and the attached water is released. The scale responds quickly, sometimes dramatically, creating the illusion of progress. But this is not fat leaving the body. It is a short-term fuel reserve being adjusted. When normal eating resumes, glycogen returns, water follows, and the scale rises again, often interpreted as failure rather than a predictable physiological cycle. Muscle tissue adds another layer of misunderstanding. Muscle is dense and heavy, yet it occupies relatively little space. A person can lose muscle mass while their body shape changes very little, and the scale will reward this loss with a lower number. At the same time, another person can gain muscle while losing fat, becoming smaller in circumference but heavier on the scale. Without context, the number suggests regression, even as health, strength, and metabolic capacity improve. This is where the idea of meaning becomes important. Weight itself does not tell us whether the body is becoming more capable or more fragile. It does not reveal whether metabolic health is improving or declining. It does not show whether inflammation is rising or falling, or whether organs are being supported or stressed. Two bodies with identical weights can have vastly different internal realities, shaped by tissue composition, fat distribution, and physiological resilience. When weight becomes the primary focus, it can distort behavior. People begin to chase short-term drops rather than long-term change. Extreme restriction, dehydration, and excessive exercise become tempting because they move the number quickly. The scale reinforces these strategies even when they erode muscle, disrupt hormones, and increase future fat regain. In this way, the scale does not just measure weight, it shapes choices, often without our awareness. This distortion is amplified by the way progress is framed culturally. Daily weigh-ins are treated as accountability, yet the body does not operate on a daily timetable. Biological change unfolds over weeks and months, not overnight. Expecting the scale to reflect meaningful adaptation every morning is like checking the height of a growing tree each day and feeling disappointed when it looks the same. The change is happening, but not on a scale that rewards impatience. There is also a psychological cost to equating weight with success. A higher number can overshadow positive behaviors, making someone feel as though effort was wasted. A lower number can justify unsustainable habits, encouraging their continuation. Over time, this creates a relationship with the body that is transactional rather than attentive. The body becomes something to manage rather than something to understand. None of this means that body weight is irrelevant. It means that weight is incomplete information. Like a single word torn from a sentence, it lacks the surrounding context that gives it meaning. When used alongside other indicators such as strength, energy levels, movement ease, waist circumference, sleep quality, and metabolic markers, it can contribute to a broader picture. Alone, it is too blunt to guide nuanced decisions. Understanding this does not require rejecting the scale, but reframing its role. The number can be observed without being obeyed. It can be recorded without being interpreted as a verdict. When weight is seen as a reflection of many shifting variables rather than a direct measure of fat or health, it loses its power to provoke fear or false celebration. In learning to separate mass from meaning, people often discover a quieter kind of progress. They notice how their bodies feel rather than how they weigh. They recognize patterns instead of reacting to single data points. The scale becomes a tool rather than a judge, and the body becomes a complex system worthy of patience rather than a problem to be solved. Fat loss is often described as a simple matter of eating less and moving more, but this explanation flattens a deeply complex biological process into a slogan. The body does not release stored fat as a response to punishment. It releases fat when internal conditions signal that doing so is safe and necessary. This distinction matters because it reframes fat loss not as an act of force, but as a process of communication between cells, hormones, and the brain. At the center of this communication system is energy regulation. The body evolved to survive unpredictable food availability, not constant abundance. Fat tissue developed as a long-term insurance policy, a buffer against famine. Because of this history, the body is cautious about giving it up. It does not interpret calorie restriction as a fitness goal or an aesthetic desire. It interprets it as a potential threat. Whether it responds by releasing fat or conserving it depends on how severe and how sustained that threat appears. Hormones act as messengers in this decision-making process. Insulin, for example, plays a critical role in determining whether fat is stored or released. When insulin levels are consistently high, fat breakdown is suppressed, not because the body is stubborn, but because insulin signals that energy is plentiful in the bloodstream. When insulin levels fall between meals and overnight, fat cells are more likely to release stored energy. This is not a moral process tied to food choices being good or bad. It is a biochemical response to patterns. Stress hormones add another layer. Cortisol rises in response to psychological stress, sleep deprivation, excessive training, or extreme dieting. While cortisol helps mobilize energy in the short term, Chronically elevated levels can encourage fat storage, particularly around the abdomen. From the body's perspective, this makes sense. If stress is high and persistent, storing energy where it can be accessed quickly may improve survival. From a modern health perspective, it feels deeply unfair, but biology is not designed to be fair, only adaptive. Leptin, a hormone released by fat cells themselves, communicates energy availability to the brain. When fat mass is adequate and food intake is sufficient, leptin helps regulate appetite and energy expenditure. When intake drops sharply, leptin levels fall, signaling scarcity. Hunger increases, metabolic rate may decrease, and the body becomes more resistant to further fat loss. This is not a flaw in the system, it is the system working as intended. Because of these hormonal interactions, aggressive calorie restriction often backfires. The body responds not by burning fat more efficiently, but by conserving it. Muscle tissue may be broken down to meet immediate needs because it is more metabolically accessible than fat. Resting energy expenditure declines. Movement becomes unconsciously more economical. Hunger grows louder. The person feels as though their body is fighting them, when in reality, it is protecting itself. Fat loss tends to occur most reliably when the body perceives a mild, consistent energy demand rather than an emergency. This is why gradual changes often succeed where extreme ones fail. Adequate protein intake signals that muscle tissue should be preserved. Regular movement signals that energy is needed, but not desperately so. Sufficient sleep and recovery signal that the environment is stable. Together, these inputs create conditions under which fat can be released without triggering defensive adaptations. This perspective challenges the idea that discipline alone drives fat loss. Willpower can influence behavior, but it cannot override hormonal feedback loops indefinitely. A person can ignore hunger signals for a time, but biology will eventually assert itself. Sustainable fat loss emerges not from constant resistance to the body's signals, but from aligning behavior with them. Understanding fat loss as a biological decision also invites compassion. Struggles with fat loss are often framed as personal failures, when they are more accurately described as mismatches between strategy and physiology. Two people can follow the same plan and experience different outcomes because their hormonal environments, stress levels, sleep patterns, and histories differ. This variability is not an excuse, but an explanation. When fat loss is approached as a collaborative process, strategies shift. The focus moves from how little one can eat to how well one can nourish, from how hard one can train to how consistently one can move, from how quickly results appear to whether the body feels supported. Progress becomes less dramatic, but more durable. Over time, this approach tends to reduce the internal conflict many people feel. Hunger becomes a signal to interpret rather than an enemy to defeat. Rest becomes a component of progress rather than a reward for it. The body stops being treated as a machine that must be forced into compliance and starts being recognized as an adaptive system responding logically to its environment. In this light, fat loss is not an act of punishment imposed on the body, but an outcome that emerges when the body senses stability, adequacy, and purpose. It is less about deprivation and more about creating the right conditions for change. Rapid weight loss is often celebrated as proof that a method is working, yet speed can be deceptive. When body weight drops quickly, the assumption is that fat is disappearing just as fast. In reality, the body follows a hierarchy of loss, and fat is rarely at the top of that list. When energy intake is cut sharply, the body looks for the fastest and least costly way to adapt, and that often means shedding water, glycogen, and muscle before it willingly releases fat. Water loss is usually the first contributor. As food intake drops, especially carbohydrates, glycogen stores decline. Because glycogen binds water inside muscles and the liver, its depletion releases significant fluid. The scale responds immediately, sometimes within days, creating a sense of success. But this loss does not reflect a change in long-term energy stores. It is a temporary adjustment that will reverse as soon as normal eating resumes. Muscle loss often follows quietly. Muscle tissue is metabolically expensive to maintain and relatively easy for the body to break down during perceived scarcity. When calories are severely restricted and protein intake is inadequate, the body may sacrifice muscle to meet immediate energy needs. This reduces total body weight and is often misinterpreted as fat loss. Over time, however, reduced muscle mass lowers resting energy expenditure, meaning the body requires fewer calories to maintain itself. As metabolism adapts downward, the body becomes more efficient at surviving on less energy. This efficiency is biologically impressive but counterproductive for long-term fat loss. Hunger increases, fatigue sets in, and spontaneous movement often decreases without conscious awareness. The person may feel as though they are doing everything right, yet progress slows or stops. This plateau is not resistance. It is adaptation. Fat tissue, meanwhile, is being protected. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. Fat represents long-term survival insurance, and the body is reluctant to spend it during what feels like a crisis. Instead of burning fat freely, the body conserves it while adjusting other systems to reduce energy demand. The scale may continue to drop for a time, masking this protection, but the internal shift is already underway. When weight loss is driven primarily by muscle and water loss, the consequences extend beyond metabolism. Strength declines, physical resilience weakens, and the body becomes less capable of handling future stress. Hormonal balance can be disrupted, increasing the likelihood of rebound weight gain once restriction eases. The body, having learned that food supply is unpredictable, becomes more efficient at storing energy when it returns. This cycle explains why repeated rapid weight loss attempts often lead to frustration and diminishing returns. Each cycle teaches the body to defend itself more aggressively. Fat loss becomes harder not because the body is broken, but because it has adapted. Sustainable fat loss follows a different path. It prioritizes muscle preservation through adequate protein and resistance-based movement. It allows weight to change more slowly, reducing the need for metabolic defense. In this environment, fat loss becomes possible without sacrificing the tissues that support long-term health. Movement and nourishment are often framed as tools for compensation, as if food must be earned and exercise must pay a debt. This perspective quietly turns daily habits into moral transactions, where eating becomes something to justify and movement becomes something to endure. From a biological standpoint, however, food and movement are not punishments or rewards. They are signals that inform the body about its environment and influence how it allocates energy. When the body receives adequate nourishment, it does not interpret this as excess by default. It interprets it as information. Protein intake signals that muscle tissue is valuable and should be maintained. Fiber and micronutrients signal digestive stability and metabolic support. Consistent energy intake reduces the perception of scarcity, allowing hormonal systems to operate without urgency. In this context, nourishment communicates safety rather than indulgence. Movement sends its own set of messages. Resistance-based activity tells the body that strength is required, encouraging the preservation and even growth of muscle tissue. This is not about burning calories during the activity itself, but about shaping how the body adapts afterward. Muscle is metabolically active and functionally protective, And when the body is told that it is needed, it is far less likely to be broken down during periods of energy demand. Gentle, consistent movement such as walking communicates a different but equally important message. It signals that energy is being used regularly, not explosively. This encourages the body to access fat as a fuel source without triggering a stress response. Unlike extreme exercise, which can elevate stress hormones when recovery is insufficient, moderate movement supports fat oxidation while maintaining hormonal balance. When food and exercise are used as compensation tools, the signals become distorted. Severe restriction, paired with intense training, can make the body perceive an environment of constant threat. Cortisol rises, recovery suffers, and fat loss becomes more difficult despite increased effort. The person may feel disciplined, yet the body responds defensively. Viewing movement and nourishment as information rather than currency shifts behavior in subtle but powerful ways. Exercise choices become guided by sustainability rather than guilt. Food choices become guided by support rather than fear. The question changes from how much can be burned or restricted to what the body needs to function well. This approach also encourages consistency. Punishment-based strategies rely on motivation, which fluctuates. Signal-based strategies rely on routines that can be maintained even when motivation dips. Over time, these repeated signals shape metabolism, muscle retention, and energy regulation more effectively than sporadic intensity. When the body consistently receives messages of adequacy and purposeful movement, it adapts accordingly. Muscle is preserved, energy expenditure remains higher, and fat becomes a more accessible fuel source. Progress emerges not from compensating for perceived mistakes, but from reinforcing signals that align with the body's adaptive logic. Many approaches to body change are rooted in control. Calories are tightly counted, meals are restricted, training is pushed to exhaustion, and progress is judged by compliance rather than well-being. This mindset assumes that the body must be overridden to produce results, as if it were an obstacle rather than a partner. In the short term, control can produce visible change, but over time, it often leads to resistance, fatigue, and frustration. The human body is not designed to be controlled indefinitely. It is designed to adapt. Every signal it receives is interpreted through the lens of survival, and when those signals suggest threat or instability, the body responds defensively. Appetite increases, energy expenditure decreases, and fat storage becomes more efficient. These responses are often labeled as failure, but they are expressions of a system doing exactly what it evolved to do. Cooperation begins with understanding this adaptive nature. Instead of asking how to force fat loss, the question becomes how to create conditions where fat loss makes sense to the body. This shift does not remove structure or intention, it replaces domination with dialogue. Habits are chosen not to break the body down, but to support its internal logic. Consistency becomes more valuable than intensity. Regular meals that provide sufficient protein and micronutrients communicate reliability. Movement that challenges muscles without overwhelming recovery systems communicates purpose. Sleep that is protected communicates safety. Stress that is managed, rather than ignored, communicates stability. None of these signals are dramatic on their own, but together they form an environment in which the body no longer needs to defend its energy stores so aggressively. This cooperative approach also reshapes the emotional experience of change. When control is the goal, setbacks feel like personal failures. When cooperation is the goal, fluctuations are understood as feedback. A plateau becomes information rather than judgment. Hunger becomes a message to interpret rather than an enemy to silence. Rest becomes a strategy rather than a weakness. Over time, cooperation reduces internal conflict. The body no longer feels like something to battle each day. Trust develops, not because results are instant, but because the process feels sustainable. This trust matters because long-term change depends on repetition, and repetition depends on tolerance. People can tolerate supportive habits far longer than punishing ones. Fat loss that emerges from cooperation is often quieter. The scale may move slowly or irregularly. Changes may be noticed first in energy, strength, or comfort rather than numbers. This subtlety can feel unsettling at first, especially for those accustomed to dramatic shifts. Yet it is this subtlety that often makes the change durable. When the body senses that food is not disappearing, that movement is purposeful rather than frantic, and that rest is allowed, it begins to release stored fat without protest. There is no internal alarm, no urgent need to conserve. Fat loss becomes a natural adjustment rather than a hard-won victory. In this way, sustainable fat loss is not achieved by winning a battle against the body, but by ending the battle altogether and allowing adaptation to unfold under conditions of respect and patience. In the end, the real difference between fat loss and weight loss is not just physiological but relational. Weight loss asks, how quickly can I make this number smaller? Fat loss asks, how can I support my body so it feels safe enough to change? One question demands compliance, the other invites cooperation. And the body, ancient and wise in its own way, responds very differently to each.